Hey, this is Skullgirdle, and welcome to Undead Conversations with Ornamenti de Oro. So, will you please introduce yourself and what you do with the band?
Okay, my name is Gustavo, and I am the only member of the project Ornamenti d'Oro. I've been doing this for since 2013 already,
Oh, so
and
six
yeah, I do
years.
have. Yeah, this particular project, yes, I've been making music for a much longer time, but yeah, this project started, yeah, 6 years ago.
What are your other projects?
I had tons of bands, and yeah, I started in the 90s. The band that was like before this, I had a band for like more than 10 years called Kiev, like the city.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It started like a sort of like a dark ambient, mm, like early industrial thing in the early 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
and it got more a bit more structured with time, and by 2012, like we were going nowhere. We were playing in my hometown, and it was like and so I started this as a side project, and eventually the band just disappeared,
Mm-hmm.
dissolved, and kept on doing this. And yeah, and it's been doing it since then.
Ah, well, I've seen actually photos of you performing live. So, where do you generally perform? Do you perform at goth clubs? Because I would think that. Well, I think you're in the goth umbrella personally. I know some people have a real stick up their ass about it. You have to be gothic rock to be goth. You know how that goes. I'm sure you've dealt with that. So when you play, because I know you have, what types of clubs do you play in? Do you play in goth clubs and with other goth acts?
Uh, Not really, to be
Hmm.
honest. It also it's very different in Argentina and here in Spain because I'm from Argentina,
Mm-hmm.
and but I'm living in Madrid since 3.5 years ago,
Oh.
and everything's very different. And back in Argentina in Buenos Aires, I played very often, and there I mostly played in small festivals,
Mm-hmm.
either with more electronic, like experimental electronic uh, bands or projects, or in more goth in the broad, sense of the word, cold wave, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Right. Right. Yeah, you fit right in there.
And I would go like from one to the other, and it was pretty good actually. And here it hasn't been a bit more difficult. I think my music is goth also in a way that is not necessarily in the traditional sense of the word, but
Right.
yeah, but also it is kind of. Here I played in very strange places in general, and I've whenever they invite me, I go. But usually very small clubs. But the scene here in Madrid, at least, is very small.
Oh, it is. Is
So
it bigger in Barcelona? Is that where the bigger
Barcelona's a
scene
big,
is?
yeah, it's more interesting, and I've played there once with a band called Malefixio,
Oh yeah, I know who
which
that
is
is.
very, yeah, they're great. They're great live. They're great people, and I play with them and some guys called My Own Burial,
Oh, I don't know if I've
and
heard of them.
it's like very like death rock, very.
Okay. Okay.
It was great. Yeah, and the scene there is it's better in a way because of the people. Here is very small because the audience is small.
Yeah, in Dallas, when I go to shows, it's a pretty eclectic mix because I went to see, it was actually Twin Tribes, and I went to see him at a club called The Nines, which was tiny. I saw Esoteric there too, and it was tiny. I mean, you may have maybe 50 people at the show for the headliner. There was a band there in Dallas that had been on hiatus, and there were as many or more people there to see them. They're called Garden of Mary, and they're pretty good. They sound kind of in that almost shoegaze goth place, shoegaze dark wave post punk place. Really, I really love this band. I'm really glad they're back playing. But what I didn't know is that Twin Tribes had asked them as soon as they found out they were playing Dallas, as soon as they got the gig, they asked Garden of Mary to play again, and it was so that was their debut show. So it was oddly surreal. We had this band called Bathhouse, which was very experimental, and the woman who was singing walked through the audience the whole time. They turned off the lights, and strobe lights were going off, and it was really interesting. And then Rose Garden Funeral Party, which you may have heard of because they are kind of breaking into the international scene now. So they had their crowd there. And then Twin Tribes had a smaller crowd than Garden of Mary, but the show was so eclectic because with Rose Garden Funeral Party, when you see them live, the first vibe I get every time I see them is Joan Jett. Every time. I mean, they're good. I'm not saying they're not good. They're a good band. They're solid. They're always going to bring a good show. But I always think Joan Jett, and then they have like hints of a little bit of goth and maybe a Susie vibe and stuff like that. And then we have this bathhouse band that's just something completely different and experimental. And I love my experimental music. And then we have Garden of Mary, which has the shoegaze and post punk, and then we have Twin Tribes, which is dark wave with just a little bit of post punk in it. So our shows here are eclectic and have a lot of bands at them. We have like 3 to 4 bands for every show. But sometimes they'll play at a club that usually has metal. Sometimes they'll play at a club where you see just all sorts of different stuff. They may have had blues the night before. So I don't feel like we have any clubs that are actually dedicated to goth. We have goth nights. We have 2 clubs that do goth nights. So we have 3 goth nights a week in the area. But as far as bands playing, and they only play on not Friday or Saturday. I had to see Clan of Zymox. I had to see a band that big to see a Saturday night. And I was like, damn. So we have all weeknights here. And yet you see
Yeah.
50 to 100 people. They're like 300 people going to Drab Majesty. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like we don't have a scene, but it's kind of odd. So it does kind of change from city to city because the bigger acts go to Austin and they get to play weekend days there. We never get weekend days.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of the same here. Like for example, I went to see Drat Majesty. I think it was last year,
Mm-hmm.
and there, I don't know, there were 50 people at most
Oh my God.
in Madrid.
I'm
Like
telling you, it's
five
so
5 million
weird.
people, and this is not like an obscure band, and
No,
at the
no.
peak of their game. And this year, they have a tour already, and they're not coming to Madrid. You know,
Oh
they just
man.
skip. And that has been going on for a while.
Oh,
I went to see Adult. Do you know them?
who?
They're like a late 90s, early 2000s kind of electronic,
Oh,
uh,
I miss the
kind of.
90s. I miss the 90s. It's all new to me, so
Yeah,
so I'll go listen to
this
them.
is yeah. These guys were like, I don't know. They like they were kind of famous in like in the mid 2000s, I guess.
Okay.
They're great. They're great, and we were like 25 people. I don't know, on a Sunday, and it was
Sunday.
strange. So now they're not coming back either, and so
Ah.
it's strange. So a lot of bands when they tour Europe now they just don't bother coming to Madrid. They
Oh,
just go
that
straight about
sucks.
they do Lisbon,
Mm-hmm.
Barcelona, and
Mm-hmm.
just fly over us. But it's understandable because there's no audience, there's no real audience, and that happens. That kind of happened to me as well in a way. So I never
Yeah.
really fitted into the scene. Neither the more electronic, experimental electronic,
Mm-hmm.
nor the more post punk
Uh-huh.
because
Yeah. So
the,
in my
the,
in my area, you would have those gigs because they mix it up so much. You would have, I mean, they'd still be in small clubs, but because I love that mix. I just think it makes everybody sound better. When you have something that is so different from the other bands, it just sounds really great. So that's very interesting about Madrid because I never would have thought that. But I do see more bands actually out of Barcelona. So I actually had thought at first that you were out of Barcelona and not Madrid. And so what kind of music is more popular in Madrid? I mean, what kind of subcultural is it metal?
yeah, metal is important. Not that they have a lot of local bands though. Not even like bands come here and play, and they yeah, and but Madrid doesn't really produces a lot of metal either.
Huh.
Like that, it's very kind of traditional rock and roll kind of city,
Oh, okay.
and a lot of indie stuff,
Oh,
and
like when my friend tells me she loves post punk and then she's like, "This is the band I'm listening to," and it's Interpol. And I go and listen to Interpol and I like dark post punk. I am not a big fan of not dark post punk. So I'm like,
yeah,
okay, so they're playing indie. Yeah, I call it indie. We call it hipster. We do call it India,
Kind of
but
like that. Yeah, that's huge here. That's huge.
well, that's who makes sure that
Yeah.
the Drab Majesty concerts are full. As you see half hipsters there, you might see out of the 200 people that were probably at that show, between the patio and inside, there were probably 10 or 12 people that you could identify visually as goth.
Yeah.
So do you guys have goth nights? Do you have, or do you just kind of not much at
Couple
all?
of them. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, there's a couple of nights. Yeah, and they're fine actually. But there's again, it's very small crowd,
Hmm.
very small crowd. And in Barcelona, I mean, I played just once there, but it was obviously very different. And they played like with these two local goth goth rock, death rock
Hmm.
bands.
Hmm.
So it was very different. I played in between those two, and then like after the concert, it was like a traditionally goth rock night. So we were all there
Oh.
just dancing to, I don't know, whatever, like Rosetta Stone and
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Hmm.
But the concert itself was very eclectic as well, in a way,
Well, that's
and that was
good.
great.
Do you think that a lot more of the Spanish speaking bands have a tendency to sound more death rock? Because I feel like that they're in Mexico, Central America, South America. I feel like the sound is frequently has more of a death rock feel to it. Like they really understand death rock. Like if you went to LA here in the US, we generally I feel like we understand death rock pretty well because it's from here. But I feel like when it's Spanish speaking, the death rock is really kind of pretty true to death rock, and then some bands that call themselves gothic rock have that little bit of death rock in them. But do you feel like that's the same in Spain as well?
It is. There's like a tradition here that goes all the way to the 80s with Parálisis Permanente, like goth. What is considered goth here is mostly something more connected to punk in a way
Uh huh.
that that's kind of like the idea that people have here. It's still like the early 80s kind of dark punk. In Latin America, is again because of punk. I also come
Mm-hmm.
from listening to punk, and a lot of people just stays kind of there in the way
Mm-hmm.
they approach like making music, and you can tell that's a huge influence, and I love that. And I love it, to be honest. It's
Yeah,
great.
I like when
And
you see some of the tradition, but I also think that there's some innovation there as well. And I think that the Mexican goth has been a really hot topic for people in the US for sure. Because all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, they've been going hard for a straight 40 years and have never stopped. And oh, there's all
yeah,
this,
yeah,
just every town has some really kick ass band that's playing goth genre, dark wave, stuff like that. Generally, they go for more gothic rock and what were we just talking about? Death rock. But there's so many good bands just in Mexico that I'm like, well, okay, well, if we go to Mexico, well, what's in Guatemala? What's in Nicaragua? What's in Costa Rica? But what is everywhere? If we've got this pocket here, what is and Chilean all of a sudden with that could be because I talked to Vladi from Jesucrisis, but I'm starting to see more stuff that says they're from Chile as well. So I'm very excited to see more goth, death rock, dark wave, whatever you got from Spanish speaking countries. But I also want to see them perform in Spanish because
yeah.
I know that people think that it sounds better in English, that they think that a lot of the words sound better in English. But I like to see people take a heavy influence from their own country because I think that's where some of the innovation comes from and where we have differences. And a really good example of that is Godless Procession. Now they're starting to sing some in English, but that first album of theirs, using the traditional Mexican throaty singing style, is so beautiful. And I love it because it sounds Mexican. It sounds like it's from Mexico. I just want to see people use their native traditional language, culture, history, etc.
But there's a reason for that as well. I mean, I can talk about this also because I sing in English, and with time I started singing not in English, not in like in any language, because I don't really care a lot about lyrics, to be honest.
Well, you have some.
Uh, but I have a couple, yeah. But the thing is that if you grew up listening to music in English, like 95% of the music you listen to was in English. That's part of the musical quality of the music you're making as well. Just as you internalize a lot of the sounds, a lot of the structures,
Hmm.
the sound of the lyrics, not because of the meaning, but because of the sounds of the language itself. It's kind of part of the musical idiom, you know. Like you grow up listening. Oh, I like the sound of this reverb, the sound of the chorus with the guitar, and the language is part of that. And when you start creating your own stuff, it just feels weird singing in your own language. That's why a lot of Spanish-speaking bands don't speak, don't sing in Spanish. A lot of us we try at first, and it just doesn't work because we don't really expect to listen to that in the context of the music because it doesn't fit from our education, musical education. I don't know if it makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for explaining that because I'm a native English speaker. And so the music comes to me in my language. And I've wondered for years, I was like, why is everybody saying it in English? And when I ask, all they ever say is, well, it sounds better. And I'm like, well, why do you think it sounds better?
Yeah, it sounds better because it doesn't. It sounds more like music and less uh, uh, as words. You
Okay, and
know.
from my point of view, I'm like, you're using a harsh, clipped language with very hard R's. So sometimes I'm like, wow, it seems like it'd be so much easier to sing in a different language, but it makes sense if it's traditionally where at some point the whole world was like, oh, we're all going to speak English now because these two large and powerful countries are too lazy to learn anybody else's language. That's where I think English around the world comes from.
It's probably true.
Not a lot of bilingual people in the US, to be perfectly honest, who haven't lived outside of the country. The second language in this country is almost always Spanish,
Yeah,
or
yeah. I'm
the
a,
person is immigrant. I figured you knew that. Since like
yeah,
half of our
yeah.
country was Mexico until 150 years ago.
Exactly. Like you live in Texas, right? So yeah, it's
Yes.
Texas.
Yes.
Cool.
And I know someone who's got their kid in school and they're learning Spanish and English together. And that's how I think it should be. Because we don't have
Yeah,
an official language. People are like, hey, speak English when you get here. I'm like, you know what? Kiss my ass. Half of this country
yeah,
was Spanish speaking, and we don't have an official language. So you're blowing out your ass, man. Anyway, and we're like one of the only places that's not bilingual. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's good for you to be bilingual. But let me get off my soapbox now. So, Ornamenti di
yeah.
Ordo. I've looked it up and I did not look
It's
it up right before this. What does that specifically mean and where does it come from?
that is Italian for ornaments of gold, which is of course a Susie and the Banshee song.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to pick a name for the project, and I wanted it to be in Italian. I wanted it to be an Italian sentence or word, and I don't know. That's one of my favorite Banshee song, and it sounded great, and I started using it, and I loved it.
Oh, fantastic.
But that's what the name it is. That's what the name is. Actually, it's just that. It's the title of Ornament of Gold in
Well,
Italian. Because
well
when I
just
started
yeah.
this, I was kind of like obsessed with Italo disco. I was listening to Italo
Yeah,
all
I've
the
heard some.
time, so it
I've
was a
heard some.
huge influence at the beginning. So I wanted to sing in Italian. I wanted everything to be in Italian. I didn't do it, but I
Do
knew
you
the
speak
name
Italian?
a little bit, a little bit. Yeah, and my wife is half Italian, and in Argentina we have just a huge influence of Italian. My grandmother was
Hmm.
Italian. One of my grandmothers was Italian. It's everywhere, so we all kind of understand it in a way. Yeah, that's what it is, pretty
Oh,
much.
cool. Okay, so that does not go with the themes of the Mater Tanenbrarum, right?
Very good.
And
It's
the
mater,
themes.
mater tenebrarum,
Wait, say it again. Say it right.
mat, mater tenebrarum.
Oh my God, I knew I had that fucked up.
It's Latin. Yeah, it's
Okay,
Latin.
well, I didn't take Latin. Mater Tanenbrarum.
That's perfect. That's excellent.
Oh,
Very
you're
good.
so nice. You're so way too kind.
I'm
So
a
that
language
is.
teacher, so um,
What do you teach
yeah,
Spanish or do you teach English or?
I teach English and Spanish as a second language also a little bit, but mostly
Oh,
English.
so you're who I'd go to if I moved to Spain and I was like, shit, I don't know any Spanish. I'd have to if I went to Spain.
Yeah, but if you're a tourist here, you can perfectly survive speaking English.
Oh, yeah. Well,
or
that's Europe.
violently.
That's just Europe because they know we're lazy. In Germany, I ran into one person who didn't speak English fluently. One the whole time, and happened to be having lunch with a German, so it worked out okay. Is it actually based on Mater Tanenbrarum? Is it actually based on Suspiria?
It is, but indirectly based. The title comes from a short story by actually a Spanish author called Pilar Pedraza. She's like my favorite living author. She writes kind of horror, not exactly horror, but kind of horror. I'm a huge fan, and this is the first short story I read by her, and the short story is indirectly is a kind of a reference to the three mothers
Yep.
of the Dario Argento. And I had watched, of course, Inferno and Suspiria before, but I didn't know about that. I mean, I never made the connection. I made it afterwards.
Uh huh.
So yeah, the Mater Tenebrarum is, so it's kind of both things. Is both the a reference to this story, which is amazing,
Mm-hmm.
and also to Argento's films. Of course, he's Italian, so it's also part of the same kind of universe of
Yeah,
Italian
that's.
horror.
I like how you brought that all back around to Ornamenti d'Oro. What you just said about how you didn't realize that story was related to the triptych of movies is interesting to me because if you really love something, if you love a poem, a story, an album, lyrics, it really pays to read up on it and to find out what the creator, author, musician, whatever, what they meant. Because you will
Uh,
find all sorts of shit and you're like, wait, what? And one of my favorites is literary references. I love to see them because in the goth subculture world, at least over here, everybody thinks it's all Poe, 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 Baudelaire, Poe, Poe, Poe. So everybody thinks it's all about
yeah,
Edgar Allan Poe. But talking about Susie and the Banshees, one of their more famous songs, Christine, is written about from the movie The Three Faces of Eve, the book about it by Christine, who is the author, the woman who had the multiple personalities. And so they read it. Steve Severin read it, and then Susie read it, and they wrote a song about it. And it just so happens to be not about a gothic book; it's a true story and it's about something new. It's like Killing an Arab is about the stranger, L'Étrange. So it's
I mean,
about an existential book. And so I always want to point that out. And I mean, there's probably like 1,000 written about the metamorphosis about Kafka. But I always want to point that out when it's not, especially contemporary, because I find that musicians like to read, generally like to read, whether it's novels or poetry. Y'all like to read quite a bit and the influences go much further beyond Gothic novels from the 17 and 1800s.
and in the Goth tradition, like in the Goth tradition itself, it's always been extremely literary. Not only
Mm-hmm.
Gothic literature, of course, like going back to Bauhaus and
Yep.
UKK. There's this whole like taking from British literature in general, and yeah, of course. I'm actually look. I'm reading this. Do you know about this? I mean, I don't know if you can see
Wait,
it.
33 and a third.
It is look. No, do you know what this is? I bought it a
Peep
couple of days
Show.
ago, and I read.
Is that based
It
on the
is
Susie song, or is that what the song is based on?
no. It is a book where the author, which is a woman, she analyzes Peep Show, the album, as if
Oh,
it were. It is actually an academic work, like it's like a PhD
yeah,
thesis and
yeah.
some. And she analyzes the entire Peep Show album, song by song, from the point of view of movie soundtrack analysis instead of pop music. So every song is a chapter of the book,
Mm-hmm.
and each song matches a particular genre of film music.
Okay, that sounds really good.
Amazing, yeah. it
Well,
is.
there's
It
not a
is
lot of
great.
academic work in on anything in the goth subculture. And a lot of times they leave the music out of it when they do academic. They're just looking at the social.
Oh, that's very frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They want to say that we all have major depression and we just look the way we look so people will stare at us. And I was like, yeah, most of us look the way we look in spite of people staring at us.
I can tell you, in the 90s in provincial Argentina, it wasn't easy being a teenage
Yeah.
goth.
I'm grateful for my age because they're not going to fuck with me like they would if I was 20.
Yeah,
So I bypassed a lot of that. But yeah, in the back in the 80s, and I'm north of Dallas, and Dallas had a thriving goth community at the time. We've never not had a goth community. It's gone a little quiet, but as of the early 90s, we've had a goth community the whole time.
that's
But I
amazing.
would go to a store and I didn't look like this. I think about it now, I guess I did look goth, but I didn't really think about it because you didn't think about it back then. You just did
Yeah,
what you did. And I didn't have black hair. I didn't wear a bunch of spikes and shit like that. But I'm thinking about it now. I'm like, yeah, okay, I had the look. But I would go to stores, and I was a fashion major at the time. So I was in school for art for fashion. And I would go to like very expensive stores where the couture designers were. And every single time I went, there would be somebody who worked in the store that was less than 10 feet from me at all times. I mean, I had been followed around in convenience stores and I was like, I don't think I looked like a criminal. Certainly don't think I looked like a criminal when I was younger, but it happened to me all the time. And I guess I was the one of two of us who were very darkly inclined of the friends that I hung out with. And it would happen to the two of us and nobody else would have that same problem.
yeah,
So,
yeah. But going back to the thing that academia or in general they
mhm,
have a
mhm.
obsessing on the social aspect of it
Yeah.
and not paying attention to the production, to the music,
Yeah.
to the lyrics, to is I think that deep down they don't really respect what we do.
I
That's
agree.
my like, I think they still think that it's like just shit music, just cheesy stuff, and they just think it's interesting from the point of view of like
Yeah.
anthropology, and they don't really pay attention to the art itself. So it is eventually we start having our own thing, our own magazines, our own
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
podcasts, whatever it is. This book is exactly the opposite. I mean, it's a pleasure. Imagine reading like 2 pages where the author describes with like excruciating detail the effects used in this particular part of the song. The guitar is doing this and the
Mhm.
bass is doing this
Mhm.
using this effect and this and all analyzed from the point of view of how would that fit in the context of film music instead of pop
Right.
music. Like
Right.
music tells a story and creates atmosphere for storytelling and visual storytelling instead of pop music like on a CD or
Right.
vinyl. And it pays so much attention to the music itself. It's about the music
Mhm.
and nothing else.
Mhm.
And it's a real pleasure reading something like that. And I grew up kind of reading music about music magazines in the 90s, which were like that. They really paid a lot of attention to the music, and I was very isolated back then, and a lot of the times I was in touch with the descriptions of the music before actually getting to listen to the music itself. It wasn't easy to get the music. Sometimes it was very expensive, and I had no
Right.
money. So, sometimes the magazines were kind of cheap to get. So I would read them,
Mhm.
at 16, reading descriptions of the music, looking at some picture of the musicians, imagining how would that sound like, and it was great. It was great, and they really cared. Talk about the music in a meaningful way, and I think that's something also that might be lacking now. I think.
That was just gave me another question. I was going to ask you how you feel about reviews when you see reviews now, especially a review that's this long about a 10-song album, because I feel like we don't have, as a society, and I'm in the US, so it's amplified here, we don't have the patience to actually take the time to fully appreciate any of the arts in general. How do you feel about those short ass little review lits, mini reviews or whatever?
I don't know.
I mean,
It
they
is.
talk about a smoky club and feeling like they're in the 90s and here's the fog machine. But what is the sonic landscape of this album? It doesn't necessarily say any of that. You can dance to it.
Yeah. As a musician, it's kind of okay. Whatever. It's like don't bother if you're going to do that. It's fine. You don't,
Really?
yeah.
Well,
I don't know. There's so much stuff going on the other hand, that it's impossible to
yeah.
cover it. And that's that thing you described in the US. It happens everywhere. It happens here. It happens
Okay.
everywhere. Yeah.
Well, I
So
found that things were a little bit slower moving in general and a little bit less like that when I was in Europe. I totally believe you,
it's
and
possible.
I'm
It's
just
possible. Yeah. I don't have. I can't compare it to the US. I don't know. It is strange to when you're a musician and you know that the time that it takes to make to produce a certain
yeah.
piece of work, it's not necessarily going to have the same amount of work when you get the feedback on that, if you know what I mean.
No, no, I don't think that you usually are going to get the kind of feedback you want. And I know that I'm unusual in the fact that I think you should not ever write about an album if you haven't listened to it at least 3 times. I won't write about an album until I've listened to it probably 20. But, I've seen reviews from an album and I was like, did you listen to the album that I listened to? Because I don't even know what you're saying about this album. It doesn't make any sense. What did you hear? So I find it frustrating, but then I'm like, well, maybe that's my old lady brain from growing up where I couldn't get the music magazines. I couldn't get goth magazines. They'd be sold out everywhere or they were really expensive here. I also couldn't afford to buy much of the music in the 80s. So I had copied stuff and I lost labels and took a long time to
Yeah.
collect that again. But it's just kind of like it used to be 2 or 3 pages about something. And there's a band out there called a Cloud of Ravens. I always want to call them Murder of Crows, but that's a festival. A Cloud of Ravens. They're ravens. They're very enigmatic. There's very little information about them. So I found an article about them in a goth magazine, and I was super excited. But it was $10 for the PDF of this magazine. And finally, I was like, okay, I'm working on this review. I really want to know if they have anything about them besides they're in New York and they're on altars. I bought it $10 for a fucking PDF. It was a 20. I almost bought the physical copy. It was $25 for that plus shipping
Yeah.
from I forget where. It's an English magazine. It might have been from England, England or Germany. Anyway, so I opened this up. It's 2 pages, just 2 pages, and they've got this tiny little thing that's the exact thing from the Instagram of the band. And there are snippets of reviews, and one of my own reviews was in it. I just spent $10 to read a sentence out of my own review. I was so mad. But I can't be mad at the band. They didn't do that.
Oh, cool.
This magazine falsely advertised that they had an interview with this band. It was falsely advertised that they had an article. And I was just, oh my God, I was so mad. I was so mad that I did something I would never do. I shared that PDF with several people. I was like, can you even believe this? Oh, I'm just so pissed off about that. Okay, so what is it that caused you to decide to reimagine? Yeah, because I have both. I have both your albums. I downloaded it before the label that you were on disbanded or whatever they did, and made your
Yeah.
music disappear suddenly. But
It is.
what?
It's still there. But, yeah. I don't
Oh, it
know.
is okay. Well, I downloaded it and I download stuff and put it up on my Google so I can get it literally anywhere I want. I also have yours. I think both of yours are probably on my phone as well. Because I took one to Germany and one I just put on my phone in case I want it there. Because the reimagined one is the one I listen to over and over and over again. It is incredible. It is one of my favorite albums. I have nothing exactly like it, but I consider it to be kind of a heavy ambient sound. It's a little heavy for ambient, but it's still I don't know. There's just something about it. I was like, okay, this is magical. What caused you to decide to reimagine an album that I already felt was successful?
Well, what happened was that I was starting to work on in a new album, which I'm still working on. Yeah, but it was or it is. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but the idea was going to be an album without any beats. It was going to be just vocals and a couple of other
I'm
samples and
listening.
stuff like that. What? Oh, yeah, like no beats
Like
whatsoever.
like Ligeti, like a Ligeti chorale.
I wish, I wish that was.
Well,
Well,
but the dark wave
I'm
version.
listening mostly to classical music last couple of years, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a huge influence, especially late 19th century stuff. But
Mm.
that was what. that was the idea, and I was working on that. And in the meantime, I started just playing around with one of the tracks
Hmm.
of the old album because most of those songs are kind of old, because it's a batch of songs that I've been playing live since I started. Moved different
Hmm.
cities and different continents, and carried those songs around until I
Hmm.
sat down and recorded them. They already felt a bit old, and I was starting to work on new material. But
Hmm.
by the time this album was released, so it already felt, to me personally, even if it was new for most people, to me it was a bit okay. This is more like an anthology in a way, you know. So I wanted to make something that was the same songs, but with the sound I was starting to work on for the new stuff.
Hmm.
But it was at first it was like I'm gonna do one, maybe like post it on somewhere, and then I just said no, why not? I'll try the rest. And so I removed all the beats, and I started,
Did you?
basically there's no beats
Oh yeah, I'm gonna.
at all.
I'm gonna put that on. I listened to it right before this, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. Well, obviously you're right. You wrote it, but huh, interesting.
It still has rhythm, you know,
Oh well, yeah. Rhythm isn't just about beats.
but no beats. So that was the idea. How can I create
Hmm.
the same idea? And I didn't change any of the BPM of the tracks. They have the same tempo as the originals,
Hmm. Yeah.
exactly. But the fact that there's no beats kind of feel makes you feel like it sounds more slowly, like everything goes slower in a way, even though
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
exactly the same BPM. So the idea was working on the vocals mostly
Hmm.
and using the voice as the instrument, as the main instrument, which is what I'm doing with the new stuff. So yeah, and I said, yeah, why not? And I asked a couple of people around, like, what do you think? Is this a bit too, self-indulgent? They said, why not? And
I. Uh, okay. So
see what happens.
sometimes self-indulgent is the way that you get out of you what's really inside of you. And sometimes that's where the innovation comes from. Because I'm a person who believes that true innovation comes from amateurs. I'm not saying like not professional at all. I just mean from like that underground and the
I
more amateur
understand.
produced and stuff. And I think that's where it comes from. And you may explore that for the rest of your life. But the innovation, I believe, starts there. So I'm a big fan of underground reimagining and just the experimental ideals, and also that your music is so vocally based, which actually, I want to talk about that, right?
Yes.
The way you sing is, it sounds falsetto. Is it falsetto, or are you just a very
It is.
very fucking high tenor?
No, it's mostly falsetto, and depends. Sometimes the same melody needs
Mm-hmm.
some notes, because I do have a kind of a like tenor voice,
Uh-huh.
but sometimes it's a bit of both. But it's mostly falsetto. Yeah.
Well, and it's
Yeah.
that's an extremely extremely unusual style in goth genre electronic music. I've heard it one other time, like in one song briefly, but it's very very unusual. Is And it takes skill. And people don't realize that singing falsetto is a skill, and doing it on key is a skill. It takes practice. It takes hours and hours of practice. But do people give you shit because because you're singing in this completely different style? Do they just not get it?
I think so because I never had a bad feedback because people usually don't tell you they don't like the I don't like how you sing. No one's gonna tell you that, and I understand it.
Some people
But
won't.
I think that puts people off. But
Yeah,
I'm not gonna change it.
good.
I can sing like normally.
Hmm.
I can do it, of course. But I think it's part of why some people don't really like people that would be into the music I make is not like 100% convinced because of that element. It's not something that is a part of definitely the goth darkwave tradition, like you said. It's not very usual. I don't know why, but
Because everybody wants to hear those same baritones over and over again, or they want to hear the ethereal girly voice over and over and over again. So when something comes in and it is that different, because what you're doing is that different, and it's what sets apart what you're doing, and it's what I believe makes it. I mean, there are other things, obviously, taking out the beats and doing that kind of stuff, but I think the vocals is what makes what you're doing very special and very different, and also people don't understand it. But if you were doing this in the 1500s, you would be the famous one. You would be
Thank
at the
you,
Italian
thank you.
opera. I just think it makes it more interesting. And for me, I like my standard bands. I like to listen to the Mission. I like to listen to Clan of Zymox. I like to listen to all that stuff. I love that baritone voice for the most part. But for me, I'm always looking for something that stands out, something that makes a band, a project, or whatever a little bit different. Just that kind of that extra thing that they use. Like there's a band I've recently discovered, Morte Psíquica, out of Portugal, and their
Yes,
guitar has a slight more tinkling sound to it. It's slight, but the singer sings differently. And I've discovered that Portuguese singers actually have a little bit different vocal style than like German goth does, or American goth, which kind of sounds a lot like German goth or British goth. Those three have a similar sound, but I just like to hear something different. And I don't think it doesn't fit because it's different. I think it's innovative and artistic in the difference. And I'm glad to hear that you're not going to change that, because I've seen bands that try to be more accessible, and then
yeah.
that album I don't like as much.
I'm actually going in the opposite direction. I'm taking it to an extreme, and
Really?
yes, I think you're going to be the only person who enjoys this stuff.
That's not
Uh,
possible. There are 7 billion people on this planet. Somebody else
yeah,
has got to like this.
yeah. But then again, I mean, I started. I listened to a lot of, like I said, classical
Hmm.
music,
Hmm.
and I really like 1920s, 30s. That style of melodramatic song. Like it was a kind of half jazz, half
Yeah.
romantic songwriting from that time. Like also had to do with old Hollywood
Hmm. Hmm.
musicals. Uh, and I listened to a lot of music sung by women who sing or used to sing like that,
Okay.
in a way, not
Hmm.
the rock and roll or pop way of singing. It is a very different type of singing. There's an element of traditional Argentinian music as well there in the way
Hmm.
that it's especially female vocalists do it. When I started with this, I was with all that in my mind, but I was also coming from the inside the goth tradition as well. One of the first cover versions I did was Sex Gang Children track, you know.
Hmm.
And if you listen to the way Andy Sex Gangs used to sing in the early, at least in the early albums when he was young, it's like this squeaky high voice, high pitched
Yeah. Yeah.
voice, and it's not that different actually. You just have to make it more polished and with a lot of but it's still it's not the goth vocals,
Right.
blah, blah. That's that that is just one part of the gothic tradition. And
Yes.
if you listen to even UKDK, which is one of my favorite bands,
Hmm.
I will also sang like that with a like it's not a nice masculine voice, crooning voice. It is like a uncomfortable way of singing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
listening as well, and it's a part of the goth tradition. And for some reason, it was a bit neglected in the decades after that. So in the early
Yes.
2000s, I was really into Cinema Strange, which
Hmm.
also had that. Of course, I also enjoy those, Eldridge, Husey, all of them, McCoy. I
Hmm.
love that stuff as well, obviously, and all of them. I like when male singers sing with weird high pitched voice, and
Hmm.
female singers sing with a low pitched "I'm gonna kill you" voice. Not the nice siren, but like
Yeah.
a uh,
Like Giton Damone just screaming at you in the microphone.
exactly, yeah. Or
Actually,
the
she's quite a force.
we've talked about this, but one of my favorite singers ever, actually, but today is Lynette from Bestial Mouths, and she doesn't, Bestial Mouths.
I just bought their new one, but I haven't listened to it enough yet.
You have to. You have to listen to it. It's
Oh,
amazing.
I'm going to listen
And
to it.
she's one of my favorite vocalists out there, and she's not doing it like oh seductive, the seductive. It's the exact opposite of that, and I like that. I like when it makes you a little bit uncomfortable. I think that should be part of what we call dark music. You know.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely. I did something. This is not the same thing. I mean, I will screech, and I'm actually a mezzo soprano, so I have a pretty low voice. But in art school, I did that. We had to do this found object thing. It's similar, I promise. And I made this thing. It's out of vitamin bottles, and it's all painted white and boring and stuff. And then I took this long thing, and I wrapped it in duct tape so it had a horrible texture on it, stuck feathers to it, and painted it red, and stuck it not next to it, but just far enough off where it was distracting. And when I showed it in class, people kept moving that thing closer to the rest of the art because they thought it was getting moved. And I kept having to go and fix it. And the whole point of that piece of art was to make you uncomfortable. And I did not get a great grade on it. Part of what art should do is it should shake you up. And to me, music is part of art. The arts is what I'm talking about. It should shake you up and make you uncomfortable and make you think. And what I like is when you kind of figure out why it makes you uncomfortable. And as soon as you figure out why it makes you uncomfortable, you just can't stop looking at it or listening to it or reading it. And it becomes compulsive, and you start to think of other things that will shake you up and shake other people up. And I think that is why art is so important, and why every time I see somebody cut funding to art, I want to strangle them. Or music, all the same thing. But yes, I agree with you about some of those low guttural women's voices for us. And as a woman, I was like, we need to step outside of this pretty cute, sweet thing with our little Cinderella hair and shit and just get fucking ugly. Yeah, that's why my makeup generally looks like it was put on by a 4-year-old with a crayon. Because I'm not looking for it to be perfect. I can do it perfect. And sometimes it's fun to do that, but I'm looking for it to have a certain look. And yes, I will go to a show made up just to make people uncomfortable, which is weird. And it's rare that I do it, but it's because when I look, it makes me uncomfortable, and then I like it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then it
yeah.
makes other people uncomfortable, and that's just kind of a bonus because they can't stop looking at me. There's something about going all white makeup with like weird red eyes and wearing like severed doll heads with nails in them that kind of freaks people out a little bit.
Yeah, I miss that.
Well, and people
Yeah,
in Dallas don't dress very much.
here's the same. But then there are many ways to do the same to explore the same idea.
Right.
Whatever it is, like with music or with literature, whatever it is. It's that you can always try a little, little further to the left.
Yeah.
Okay, I can do this. I know I can do this in the normal way. Now let's try pushing it a little bit further and see what
Yep.
happens. And try something that you don't know how it's gonna how maybe you fail miserably. You don't know. That's what experimental means. You
Right.
know, you're trying and something has to do it first. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that was always a part of our tradition of the Goth tradition. I don't know. I don't see anything out of the to be honest. It was always weird music. It was too weird
Yeah.
even.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. Some of it
like
was really
including
fucking
the
weird.
voice and the eldritches. It was always Goth was always weird, and it was always not trendy. It was always
Right.
what's this shit? What are you doing? You're not supposed to make music like this. This is not the right way to do it. And that's the good thing about it. So trying to conform to any genre that comes to like with a sense of how things should sound
Mm-hmm.
always,
Mm-hmm.
it is to me a bit frustrating. So
Right.
I like when bands, even bands that sound like very, for example, rock and roll. Okay, and in the middle of the album, you get a song that sounds completely different,
Mm-hmm.
and all
Mm-hmm.
the instruments are doing weird stuff they're not supposed to do. The guitar's doing the rhythm section, and the bass is playing high notes, and the
Yes.
drum is like what's going on? I like this feeling of not knowing what's happening,
Right.
And I think that's always been a part of our tradition
Oh
as
yeah.
goths. Our
Oh
hosts
yeah.
used to do it, the Banshees used to do it all the time. In the 90s, you get all these weird dark wave bands that were doing like mixing medieval music with electronics, with
Hmm.
metal, I don't know, whatever. It's just trying weird stuff
Yeah.
that no one else is doing, that no one else likes because it's considered to be cheesy, because it's considered to be bad
Hmm.
music,
Yeah.
and I don't care. I'm gonna do it anyway because it's what I love, and yeah, and that is a tradition, doing
I agree
weird.
with that. I agree with that, and it's my personal belief that goth, as we know it today, has its roots in glam rock and punk. I mean, punk, yes, we defined that punk and post punk, but I think that glam rock has a much heavier influence than a lot of people think, and that was all
Absolutely.
about doing something different and shaking things up. And punk was about saying, we're not going to go with your traditions. We have something to say. And so I'm going to bash out three chords and I'm just going to say it no matter what you think about it. And then post punk comes in and they're like, oh, really? The bass can't be a melodic instrument? Let's show you something. And it has influences that you would not even realize. And post punk, the array of post punk from the 70s and 80s is so wide. By the time you get to, like, we were talking about the Sex Gang Children, and also the Trees, and then Magazine and the Chameleons. Between those four bands, you're like, wait, this is all weird shit going on, and I can't even figure out what's happening. And then we get into goth, and in the early days, of course, it was a little bit more experimental, and a lot of bands fall to the wayside. I mean, we can rediscover them if we can find the recordings for them. But I think that experimentalism is, well, I think it's incredibly important. Otherwise, I mean, you gotta fail to get good, and experimental
Yeah.
is where you fail. Sometimes miserably, but every once in a while you come up with something good. And I agree with you that more experimental, more all-encompassing spirit is a part of goth. And yes, most of us wear black most of the time. Most of the time, there's a lot of things about the goth subculture that I think are fantastic, like the gender fluidity, just about for everybody, with fashion and stuff like that, and the willingness to admit to mental conditions because we don't have more of them. We just admit it more, and to prefer a. And this is, when you go to like golf clubs and stuff. And I'm not sure when it's popular like it is now, you're going to get more tourists. But the willingness to have a deeper conversation rather than just a surface conversation, those are all things I also equate with goth. The not only not denigration, but love of intellectualism, of philosophy, of literature, and everybody I knew when I was younger listened to some kind of music that everybody else thought was complete shit cheese. I mean, just cheesy crap. But that person would just own it. They would own it. Like I knew a guy who had a laser disc, and I don't remember what it was. There was some just crappy ass movies. Like we got to watch this again. And so every time he went over there, he's got these five movies, and they're all shit. And they're just not good. It was like E.T. And E.T. was so old hat yuck at the time. So you'd be sitting there watching E.T. and just having a really good time doing it. And it was just kind of everybody just kind of had a thing that wasn't just goth. It wasn't like my whole house has to be this perfect gray and red, and I have to have this empty mirror frame here, and I have to have all these perfect bats here, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I personally am more arsenic and old lace and I love bats and stuff like that. I have that too, some a little, but I have old lady teacups, and I am pry those out of my dead hands. And then I have a naked Barbie that sits on a shelf and I won't give her up, and I don't know why, but that naked Barbie's got to stay. It's just this weird eclectic. And back in the day, back in my time, back before the
Yeah.
Stone Age happened, that's what it was like. People had this just it was eclectic. It was very very eclectic. And so when I see like a lot of goth channels that have like closet tours and here's my apartment tour and all that kind of stuff, I see something that looks more homogenous to me.
Mm.
And I don't like it. I want to listen to UK Decay, which is funny because a friend and I were talking about why were they not as famous as Bauhaus, and the simple answer is they didn't do a Bowie cover, but also they
Well,
were very in your face. They couldn't come to the U.S. because of their political views and how
too
how
political,
raw they
yeah.
were.
If you listen to the last EP, the
Mm-hmm.
four track EP, Rising from the Dead, I think it's called.
Yeah,
It's insane. It's no, it's
yeah,
five
yeah.
tracks. Like it opens with a 10-minute track that
Yeah,
is
they,
like first 5 minutes it's just ambient sounds, and it's
Yeah.
from 1982. And it's all your tom toms, tribal rhythms,
Hmm.
screechy guitars, deep bass, deep like a funk bass,
Uh-huh. Hmm.
and Abel's vocals just all over the place with
Yeah.
literary references, talking about history,
Hmm.
politics. It's too much. Yeah, absolutely. It's intense. But
Yeah, but
Bauhaus
once you
was,
tune
was
into it
weird.
though, but yeah,
Yeah.
Bauhaus was totally different than anything that was out at the time. I mean, first of all, they're singing about vampires and shit, and they had a 9 minute single. But Bela Lugosi's dead. I know people think it's cheesy and trite or cliche. It can't be cliche because it's the first. But that song, just even being that long, was a risk, and they were very experimental with Daniel Ash's guitar, just dragging the pick down the strings and just making noise. And they have several songs like that. So, but I think they were prettier than UK Decay. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? The
There was,
sound was prettier.
yeah, and Peter was prettier as well.
Well, yeah,
You know, he,
Daniel Ash was the one everybody was nutso over here. They were more palatable to the US, and we are a very large market. So I think that's why they had more fame than UK Decay.
but then again, you talk about like when you talk about Bela Lugosi's dead, it's like
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's cliche. But when was the last time a goth band in the last 40 years put out a reggae influenced track? It hasn't really happened a lot. So the cliche
No.
did really create a genre as in that sense, like being. You know what I mean? I
Well,
love that.
it
The other
had.
day I was listening to Bauhaus and I put together all the reggae tracks. It's like eight tracks. The reggae dub,
Uh
the
huh.
remixes, or She's in Parties, which is basically another reggae track. Honeymoon Croon is also has a reggae rhythm. That no one did that after them, you know.
I'm no.
Um,
I'm just thinking. I'm thinking. Oh, reggae was kind of in the realm at the time of new romantic, because when you
yeah,
listen to some of the new romantic, like Culture Club, one of my
yeah,
all-time
Culture
favorite
Club.
bands.
Yes.
But yeah, that's heavily reggae. But they're called Culture Club because they wanted to bring world cultures together. So they actually did a lot of world music. You just can't necessarily tell. But their reggae was very heavy influence. I think that's very obvious as well. But yeah, it seems like it went the way of new romantic. And it's kind of like Bauhaus took some of that really scratchy sounding post punk and a little bit of that new romantic and kind of put it together in a way that people could digest better. Even though they were experimental, they still
Yeah.
were able to make something and package it where people really just could swallow it better. Like, what is it, Double Dare? Right? I'm
Hmm.
trying to think of one that's got those real tribal beats and stuff like that. It's just the songs that they had were prettier. They were just prettier than a lot of other bands at the time.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. When talking about goth after them, or the funk also. Funk disco was also
Oh,
very important for them. Disappeared from the goth canon.
funk,
Everything
yeah.
that had a rhythmic thing to it. That's what I
Hmm.
miss now from from
Well,
from goth. Like a focus on beats, on
yeah,
strange rhythm patterns.
yes.
Everything's too forced now, and I miss because post punk wasn't like dun dun ch, dun 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 ch. Wasn't all like
No,
that.
not at all. It broke every
Serious.
musical rule. That was the whole point,
Absolutely.
was not to put the things together you're supposed to, but to mix disparate pieces and just put all this shit that shouldn't go together. Did you ever listen to Sweet William?
I don't think so.
They're out of Germany and they have an album called Time. And they've been in Germany. They're like a 30 something year band. They're like a old school, been around forever, standard band. All the Germans know. In
Yeah.
the US, where they're like, who is that? The reason I could not stop listening to it is because it's got funk in it. And I'm like, holy shit, it has to be a German band that has we got the funk. I was like, George Clinton. I mean, not that much funk. But yes, you're right. And I found that album to be so attractive. And then their last one was a like 6 song acoustic EP, which what a risk that is for a goth band to do acoustic EP. And so I'm just
Uh,
like, oh. But yeah, they
mhm.
have that funk influence. And I absolutely agree with you that I would like to see funk. I'd like to see a little bit more funk and reggae come back because it gives that kind of a boisterous and bright sound to very dark music. And it sounds
Yeah.
really weird, but if you listen to some reggae, that shit is dark.
Absolutely.
It is like, damn, Bob Marley, the shot I shot the sheriff. That's not a happy song, guys.
And all those
And
dub tracks from the 70s, mid 70s, which is also like, 6 minute, 8 minute of delays, weird delays, like coming in
mm-hmm,
and out of the mix. And also, the what you were saying, the contrast,
mm-hmm,
you know, like really sad melodies with really strange harmonies, but you can dance to it, you
yeah.
know. And it's also that gives you that element of confusion, which is part of mystery and
Right,
strangeness.
right. And it can give you
Uh,
that almost out of body experience. And if you ever get into a goth club and they play something that sounds like that live, you just go into a trance. You have no idea. You're dancing into people. You're just bouncing off each other at that point, and you're
that's
literally
great.
in a trance in a club. And I that is so attractive to me. And then when you bring it home, of course, you're listening to that and you're still kind of have that trancy feeling. And actually, that's your reimagined Mater Tanenbrarum. That it has that trance feeling to it, and that's probably that disconnect with the beats being gone that I don't know. I just never thought about it. I just started listening to it.
Yeah, well, it is going back to that. Some of the tracks have exactly the same structure, it's the same
Mm-hmm.
song,
Yeah.
only without the beats and some effects, and that's pretty much it. There's not a lot more going on. Sometimes I just reorganize the whole track using the same elements but in a different way, keeping that sense of repetition and
Mm-hmm.
things that happen in between the same sound that's
Yeah.
over and over again. Then you don't know when it's changing and when it isn't changing. Yeah, I try to be like, because my main influence is literature, and so I
Mm-hmm.
try to make things that sound like literature. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's my that's kind of like my goal, to make
Mm-hmm.
music that can be literary, in the sense of something that's happening while something else keeps your attention.
Yeah.
It's like a
I
narrative.
gotta listen to it again. I'm gonna have to listen to this again, and it'll be a completely different album now after talking to you, which hopefully other people will do the same thing. And that's part of the point is just to these interviews is just to get to know the person behind the music or the people behind the music. So it makes every band I've talked to, it's made the music much more rich for me, knowing some of the aims behind it and the person who's creating it or the people who are creating it. So that's my hope. And now I have to go listen to it differently because you've said so much.
Well, I gotta thank you
Cool.
because yeah, and when I meant that your one of your videos was also one of the reasons why I gave this old album, a shot at trying to do something new with it.
Huh.
One of your videos was one of the reasons for it, because I was kind of sick of all those songs that I've been
Mm-hmm.
playing for a long time. I was like, okay, I'm through with this. I don't want to hear this stuff anymore. And actually, listening to you talk about it and recommending it, and it was like, I don't know, it gave me a sense of maybe I should try to give it a last new little chance as an album. That's why I wanted to also keep the same tracks in the same order. Just
Mm-hmm.
this is like the ghost of the previous album.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the reasons was you. So I gotta thank you, and thank you for all the great attention you've been paying, not only to my music but a lot of new music out there. It's very important. It's
Thank
really
you for
really needed.
noticing.
No, no,
It's
no. I mean it. Yeah.
it's actually this is more what I wanted to do with my channel after I kind of figured it out. And so when the other one died, I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to do what I want, no matter how many people actually watch it. Maybe I enjoy your music or understand it because I also kind of do things that are experimental. Because long format on YouTube is kind of a risk. People want to see pretty goth stuff. They don't want to see the music as much. And I'm just like, well, I'm just going to keep on putting it out there. Thank you for making that album because I think the reimagining of it is even better than the original. And the original is literally the only, no, I'm sorry. I like Oh Children. I was going to say the only new thing that ever said new goth on it that I ever liked. Because usually I see new goth and I'm like, oh, Jesus, it's going to be Witch House.
When back in 2011, it just grew. It grew boring very quickly. Let's just put it that way.
I've probably just never heard some of the early stuff. That could be.
The early stuff is great. Early Salem, White Ring, those. Yeah, it was really refreshing stuff.
I don't think I've ever heard of Salem. I've heard of
Prince.
White Rain, but I don't know if I've listened to them. I just didn't listen to very much because I just like with 4 or 5 bands, I found absolutely nothing that I enjoyed. So I was like, okay, well, that's going to be one of those kind of weird. Maybe there will be a little sneaky influence in the goth world, but maybe it'll just kind of go on its own way. I don't really know. I don't know where it's going. I know that music is dynamic and goth music is going to change. It's changed a lot since the 80s and the 90s, even though some people constantly refer every single review and every single song back to the 80s and 90s. There's a whole lot out there that doesn't sound like the 80s and 90s. Yes, there is a tradition of sound, but sonically we're in two different places now. And if it sounded just like the 80s, people probably wouldn't really want to buy it too much. Even when there's a heavy influence, it's not exactly like that. Okay, so is there anything that you would like to say to your fans? This is the question I ask everybody. What would you like to say to your fans? Do you have any advice or any last words or anything?
I like the last words. Yeah, no, nothing. Just get. I mean, not about my music, but in general about new music. Give it a shot. It's important to give new stuff, new stuff out there a shot. Give it a listen. Pay attention to it, and listen to it more than once, because then that's when you can actually notice all the hard work that musicians put between beats, between notes. There's like the things that are going on, and it takes a lot of work, and we all do it for free. So yeah, pay attention, give an opportunity to weird stuff. And if it makes you feel kind of, I don't know about this, why is he singing like well, maybe there's something. And also, whenever it is that music doesn't sound like the way it's supposed to, maybe that's a good thing.
Mm.
So yeah, and also I'm working on new stuff which you will probably listen to before anyone else.
Oh, don't even tease me.
No, I mean it. And it's gonna be even more strange because I said, fuck it. That's in the direction I'm going of the last album, just with new material, cinematic, strange. That's what I'm into right now. So we don't know in the future. Maybe I end up making funk. We don't know. What? I don't know. Absolutely, yeah. Listen to weird stuff. That's the only thing I think I can say. And thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the interview and for reviewing new music.
Oh, thank you for acquiescing to be interviewed.
It's a pleasure.
So, hey, thanks for watching. Until next time.